like Saddam Hussein, but much smaller scale, and some other people like him, just stupid people. And they all their main thing was they're just going to wander around and they just see who they can take over next. Take all their stuff, conquer, and then take their women, their children, their money, their goods and stuff, plunder it all, and take it home. And so what these four kings got together, and they went over there and they finally decided to take over Sodom and Gomorrah. And guess who was there? Lot. So he got stuck in that. So he lost they took Lot. That's the guy we focus on. So Abram, when he heard about this, he remembered, well, Lot, my nephew, is there. So he took 300 men of his own. He goes down there and he rescues Lot. He takes him home. He takes all of his goods and everything else and he gives them back to Lot and he restores Lot. And then there's a whole part of that's involved that I don't need to tell you about. But it's after that. Abraham just had a huge success. He just did it all. There was some really interesting stuff. You want to read all about this. But anyway, now he should come home and said, thanks God, you handed me a victory. I was able to rescue Lot. Oh Lord, I was just so desperately seeking you and I was on my knees, whatever it was that he did. But instead what he did was he went home and he got scared. He's now thinking, there's four crazy kings out there. And now they know I exist. Up until then, he's just a little tribe wandering around with tents moving around, boats, and a bunch of people. Now, these guys that he just defeated and got all their stuff back to Lot, know he exists, and he's starting to think, they're going to come and get me. So he's having some doubts, right? Oh, Abraham, you of little faith. But he is the father of our faith. But he's doubting. And so the next thing happens, which is God deals with it. That's how we want to learn how he deals with doubt. We see God then reassuring Abraham. So in verse 1, after these things, God said to Abram, do not be afraid. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. Thank you, Father Abraham. God, Father Abraham said. He says, but now that you mentioned about this reward, I seem to remember this promise about this kid you were going to give me, the son, so that I could have all these people. I'm getting old. It's not working. Where is the son? Oh, Abram. He said, we keep going like this? What's his name? Eliezer. He's just a servant guy, probably the head servant. He's going to inherit everything, and we're not going to do God. It's failing. It's not happening. You haven't given me an offspring. You promised, God. What's going on? And it's like God, I picture it like this, right? God says, no, don't worry. It's not Eliezer. It's going to be somebody, one of your offsprings that's going to come right from, Sarah's body and yours. And it's going to be one of yours. And I picture this when he says this. Then he brought Abram outside. And because now I think of God as Jesus, and I just can see this. I picture Jesus doing that with me lots of time. And, Tony, listen, you're taking a big anxiety attack right here. So he puts his arms around Abram, and he takes him outside, right? And he says, Abram, can you just take a look up there? Look at heaven. He says, are you able to can you count all those stars? You think anybody can? That's how many. That's how many offsprings. I'm telling you. You got to trust me. Right? See, God could have said, Abram, like, what the heck? God doesn't say what the heck. I would have said what the heck. But God would have said, I obviously chose the wrong guy to be the father of the faith. You're not, how many times do I have to tell you? I said I will. But, look at from Abraham, so like, how many years? Like, we're old and older, and we're not getting younger, we have no kid, and you haven't lived up to your promise, God. But But it says this, okay? Because God is so tender with him. He didn't say you're sinning. You're like, that's it. No, you got to go and sacrifice more animals or whatever. The sacrificial system hadn't come in yet. We're not in the Exodus yet. But the thing is that it was God just loved on him and said, Abram, look, you got to believe me. And Abram, and it says right there in verse 6, and he believed in the Lord, and the Lord counted him to Abram as righteousness. Then he said, I am the Lord who brought you out of where you used to be, you are, and now you're here, right? And you will, read my lips, inherit the land. But see, Abram, he believed in the Lord. I know lots of people that believe in the Lord. I'm sure everybody here believes in the Lord. We believe that God exists. But did he really believe the Lord? Did he believe the promise that God was making? No, because I can prove it, and it's not hard to prove it. He never really believed God. He was feeling good. It was a nice and fluffy feeling. And now God is being very gentle with him. But he's just believing in him. He says, I know you're God. I know you are God. And I know you have the power to do it. But did he really believe that God would do it? No, he didn't. He said he just believed in him. And the reason I can say that with no doubt whatsoever is in verse 8. It says, if you look at verse 8, it says, and he said, Oh Lord, how can I know that I'll inherit it? Well, didn't we just finish telling you that I will? No, no faith. No, it's like, Abe, you're just a baby. How can I know? And so right here we should learn a couple things for us, right? We want to take this home with ourselves. Number one, doubt will creep into your life. It doesn't mean you're not a mature Christian. It doesn't mean you're not following. It doesn't mean you've got sin coming in. It doesn't mean any of that. Doubt will come in, right? And it did come into Abraham's life many, many times over and over. It will come to us. And it will never totally go away. Every once in a while, you're going to have some doubts. But number two, what we can learn from it is that God doesn't condemn the doubt, but he doesn't condone it either. He says, Abram, look at it. Because of what we're about to see. We also saw that with Jesus. He did exactly the same thing with Thomas. He says, I can hear the voice. I am not going to believe it until I see it with my eyes. I need to actually touch the scars. That's what Thomas said. And Jesus said, oh, he didn't. You know what he could have done? You have no faith. You can't make it as a disciple. All the other guys believed. But he didn't. He said, oh, Thomas, you have little faith. You guys, all of you. But touch. Feel. Believe. Well, didn't get past the first sentence and Thomas was on his knees and he believed. See, he did not punish him for his doubt. And God is not going to punish you when you doubt. But he doesn't want you to stay there either. Because with Thomas, he says, now believe. Touch, but now believe. Believe the truth. And so that's the reality then of doubt. That's what I wanted to bring out. This is a reality. But then how does God deal with our doubts? Well, how does he deal with it is that, see, the thing is, if we totally believe in God, right, and trust in him every way, then that means that we have to give up control to him. And so from an intellectual level, we start thinking, well, that's not too good because now we have no more control. So you're thinking, well, if I don't have control, now we need to trust God, and we're not too sure if we totally are capable of trusting God. because we're giving up control. How can I know, he says. If I leave this all up to you, God, how can I know? And we will learn later that Abraham didn't learn this lesson yet. It's all good here. You think he's completely healed of this doubt. Continues to doubt. How can I know? And what he was really saying, and I bet we're all saying it. We're all saying it. Saying, God, number one, how can I know that you will do this? Really know. Can you give me a sign? I've been putting out the fleece. And it's tiring. But God, how can I know? That's what he's saying. That's the big thing. But then you get to a point where you do know. You think, yeah, I'm convinced now. I'm completely convinced. I've done it. Dude, I've done it. I got faith. I went to that big worship service and I'm 3 feet off the floor. I know I can trust God. But then you got to deal with the next problem. How do you know you can trust you? Because besides doubting God, I doubt me more than I will ever doubt God. See, how can I trust me? So now you have two big problems. You've got God. First of all, you got to get to trusting God, and that's not so hard to do. But now you got to trust you. Well, that's a whole different story. I don't trust me. So that's a huge thing. And so we get to this, what is perhaps the most amazing part of this whole thing. God has to deal with it. God has to deal with it. Please allow me to get to the end of this. This is amazing. He said something so strange. But I want you to notice this. Abraham knew exactly what God was talking about. I'll explain it later. And he just went ahead and did it. He didn't question. He says, God, you lost your mind. I knew it. Couldn't trust you. No. He just did exactly what, he didn't even tell him everything what to do. And Abraham knew what to do because it was a custom. What they were about to do is to enter into a contract. I might as well explain it now so then before I read it. In verse 9. See, it's how people made a contract. When we sign, we hire somebody and we go, oh, great landlord, how will I know? Or the landlord will look at you and say, how will I know that you'll pay your rent? And they say, oh, no problem. Here's a contract. It's a binding contract. You sign. And you know, when we say sign in blood, it's like, this is where it comes from. You sign, right? And if you do not live up to the terms of that contract, then what's going to happen is you pay the penalty. There is a penalty. And depending who did. And I learned a long time ago when I took contract law that in our world, in our time, it has to be a mutual agreement. You sign, I sign, we both sign, we've agreed. If it's a unilateral contract, it's not binding. You can't go and to the court and to the judge and have them back. You can't. Because you can't make a decision all by yourself. God can, but we can't. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead because I want to read that. When I read it, I want the impact of it. In the days of Abraham, when one of those kings, they had servants. If he was a really good king, he would bring the servants in and he would enter into a contract. A really good king would cut up some animals, put them aside, and I'm imagining they didn't have shoes. So they got blood on their feet. So they held hands, the king and the servant, and they both walked through. And what it was saying, they were acting out. It's like this is what they did. They acted it out, the contract. I'm sure in front of witnesses. As they walked through, they said, may I be cut up, just like those animals, should I not live up to what I promised you. O servant, I will treat you fair, I will treat you good, but you will be loyal for the rest of your life, or whatever it was, to my family and raising my kids. And so they would walk through, and it was done. It was binding. The king needed to live up to it, and so did the servant. Now, there was sometimes kings that weren't so good, and they would say, I have to do that. I can get servants without me walking through blood. So he'd get their servants to walk through the blood of the animals that were sitting there. It's like a ritual, because it signifies what it is. So you will be the servant for me for the rest of my life, no matter how well I treat you or feed you, or if I don't, too bad. But you're still liable to being my servant, my slave. And if you break that, then your blood, come on, we get another servant. And the king, if he became a bad king or a good king, so that's a unilateral contract. See, if he did that, no matter how bad the king was, he wasn't accountable for anything. It was the servant. You're about to see a complete upside down of that. So, in verse 9, just exactly as it reads, so he said to Abram, God said, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, a young pigeon. And then he brought all these things to him, and he cut them into two. See, God never told him what to do. This was part of the custom. Abram already understood what to do. When God said it, he said, okay, then he brought them all to him, and he cut them into two, down the middle, placed one on each side, and then he just sat there and waited. And what he had to wait was the picture that you're having there is what would happen to you if you broke the contract. You know, you're cut in half, and now the vultures will come, and, you know, the flies will come, and everybody else will come and munch on your body, body, death. So Abram sat there, and he kept the vultures away. And when the vultures came, in verse 11, came down on the carcass, Abram drove them away, right? And now, when the sun was going down, this is amazing. A deep sleep fell upon Abram. I don't think it was a sleep. It was more like a trance, but it's not really relevant, but I think he went into it, sort of a deep. And behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. And then he said to Abram, Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. In other words, what he's saying is this is not going to be a walk in the park. And will serve them in that land, and they will afflict them for 400 years. That's the truth. But there will be hundreds and thousands of your descendants. And also the nations whom they serve, I will judge. And afterwards shall come out with great possession. Now that's all happened. Remember when we studied the Exodus and Exodus? That's all happened. That was already fulfilled. Way back in the Exodus. Pharaoh was judged. He let them go. And the people of Israel, because Abram wasn't there, came out with huge wealth and possessions. A nation. They went in there as scroungy people, and they came out of there a nation. It happened. But what happened here in verse 18, what's amazing about this is that God made a covenant. He made a contract. It's a binding, unbreakable contract. And on the same day, on verse 18, it says, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. To your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. I missed some. Where the fire pot and that went through. Where did I get lost that? My
17.
Did I read it? Oh, I missed it. It's not on my notes. So this is very important. Now, how did that happen to me? I don't know. But can you read it?
That's right there.
17, yeah. And it came to pass, the sun went down. No, I did read it. And yeah, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between the pieces. So I want you to see, that's so important, because why I didn't want to miss that is because that is God. As you know, later on in the Exodus, we see God as a pillar of fire, as a pillar of smoke, a cloud of smoke, pillar of fire. So this is the same. It's the same thing. Basically, that was that horror that came down, that sense of, it was the holiness of God coming down, and he walked through those pieces. He walked through those pieces. Abram didn't walk through them. God did. That's how they did it. The thing is, it was a unilateral contract, but God can do that. This was totally in our favor. It was in Abram's favor, this unilateral contract. God passed through. Abram didn't have to. I just give you a moment to think about that. Remember what I said? I can believe in you, God, but I can't trust myself. And God's answer to Abraham was exactly this. He says, I know. I know. That's why only God walked through it. No point you making a promise. You make a promise, you walk through it, and then you break it, and then what? I already promised. And so here's what God was saying. If I break my promise, may I end up like those animals. I'll shed my blood. But if you break the promise, I will also end up like those animals. And I'll shed my blood for you. Is that enough? Oh, Mr. Abraham? Is that good enough? Or is this not a fair contract? Well, many people today argue that this is not a fair contract. This is not right. It's not fair for God. But he's God. He made it. He made this covenant. He made us. It's not right. So, if I break it, if you break it, same thing. It's unilateral. God can do it. In Hebrews 13 it says, for when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself. That's what that means. Saying, surely blessings I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. In Galatians 3, Paul saw this. He must have when the light came on. And he says that the blessing of Abraham might come upon the Gentiles in Christ Jesus, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. So what does it all mean to us? Well, it means everything. It's everything. Understanding God in this way. It means everything. Because every single time you fail God, you're going to feel condemned unless you understand this. And some of us here have never made a commitment to God. So you're not really part of this promise. So I encourage you, you need to make a commitment to Him. See, religion says, you walk through the pieces. Walk through those pieces and get blood on your feet. And then when you because you're entering, you promise God, don't break your promise, and I'll give you a little book to give you all the rules of your promise. That's what religion says. So our anchor must go farther deep into a solid rock. "2,000 years ago, darkness came down on Calvary's Hill, and it shook the world up. God was about to make good on his promise. You broke the covenant, that's us. I'll walk through the blood. God did exactly that. He made good on that promise. He didn't fail us. And we fail us. He paid it on the cross. He was cut up for our sake. What we should have done, he did it. And he lived up to his promise. He fulfilled his promise. That's what that means when Jesus says, I fulfilled it. So we have a brand new covenant. But it's not new at all, is it? It's the same promise. Jesus fulfilled it. God paid the price that we should have paid for our rebellion, for our breaking of the covenant, for our breaking of the law, for our walking away. And so if you go back to that one time, Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. In remembrance of what? All of this. In remembrance of who God is and of what he, to the length that he went for you and me, so that we may have this relationship with him, that we were restored back. We broke it. He had every right. But the promise that he made, he lived up to it. He says, while they were eating, Jesus took the cup. He reminded those disciples, as he's reminding us. He gave thanks, saying, take and eat it. This is my body broken for you. And then he took the wine and he said, take and drink. This represents the blood of the covenant that I fulfill in my blood. That's what it is. And so we get to stand here today and celebrate that together as the body of Christ.